Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Developing the Leader Within podcast. I'm Enrique, your host, and today I got Christopher Bramley all the way from the UK. We're going to be talking about leadership and remote framework. This is going to be a good one. It's been in the works for a while. Christopher, thank you so much for being with me today and sharing what you know.
You're welcome.
Folks, we were talking in the background about the remote framework. Things have undoubtedly been remote for the last 2 years, and even some, right? Because some people already had that. We were gonna explore leadership as a whole, but this piece of agility, this piece of being able to work in these environments, uh, maybe from both sides, technical and the personal. But before we get into all of that, Chris, would you mind just sharing a little bit about you, what you do, and how you go about it?
Oh, how long have you got? I do all sorts of stuff. I work. I'd say probably for this I work with four main areas which are interlinked, I would say. And the first of those is agility. And when I say agility, I don't necessarily mean capital A agile, although that's kind of part of it as well. But a lot of the more human sides of agility and resilience and building that into organization structures, individuals, and so on. The second area is complexity. So I work quite a lot with Cynefin and complex adaptive systems to understand how humans interact, make decisions, build strategies, have cognitive biases, all sorts of interesting stuff there. So that's pretty cool. Then we've kind of got the focus, I guess, of this, which is the distributed working side. So I work with a company called Remote Agility Framework, Remote AF, if you like. It's not really agility or a framework per se, but it's got a lot of incredibly clever stuff in it, like really, really intelligent guys behind it. And that helps enable organizations to be appropriately distributed or work in a way which is distributed, which is really cool. Very opposite at the moment, obviously, for the last couple of years. And then the last area really is kind of my core function, which is human learning and engagement. So understanding how we learn from a cognitive neuroscientific viewpoint, and how we kind of get motivated, engaged. So it's all very interrelated, I'd say.
Wonderful, and I tell you that I love what you do, the work that you do, because it's truly centered on the human. It's centered on the person, and and that's why I had asked you to come and talk about just the remote piece, the agility piece, and truly on the human side, because there are a lot of things that are coming our way, that have been coming our way, throughout our lives. We all have experienced something that will cause some type of reasoning to happen, some type of thought process to happen, to make us agile, to adjust to whatever circumstances that are before us. And the last 2 years will be talked about for a little while because it's something that we continue to be in. But in terms of leadership, I find that there is some difficulty in leaders becoming agile. And what I'm talking about is there's a lot of resistance to change. And that resistance to change is causing more problems. So what have you seen in that arena in terms of leadership?
Oh, I've seen quite a lot of that, but I think that it's important to look at a definition here of what leadership really is. And a lot of what we call leadership, a lot of what's defined as leadership, especially in roles, people who are leaders as their role, having that, it's a sad fact that having that in your job title doesn't make you a leader. There are many people in leadership positions who definitely are leaders, but just having that as a role title doesn't automatically make you one. One of the biggest areas of pushback I've probably seen with this, and the inability to at least comprehend or adopt agility in general, isn't really coming from leadership per se, it's coming from managers. So there is a conflation of the concept of management, excuse me, which is what you do to systems and structures, or with systems and structures, and leadership, which is what you do with culture and people, right? So systems and structures are managed and culture and people have to be led. So you typically find that people who have the capability to really lead have usually an innate level of agility anyway. It's probably worth, I guess, talking about what agility really means. And this is always contentious, especially in the kind of agile space. You know, I've had some very interesting discussions with agile coaches, other people working in agility. I remember I gave a talk a while back on, it was called Scaling Agile, and it was a bit of a bait and switch. What I was actually doing was talking about why agile and agility are the same thing. And that was something I discussed with Alistair Coburn a little while ago, and he kind of said the same thing I was saying, which was agile and agility really are the same. Capital A Agile is a process that came out of software development lifecycle. So that's more processes, practices, procedures, although there is other stuff bound into that. So when we talk about agility, even agile, what really are we looking at here? And I was told that no, you know, the basis of agility isn't what agile is. Agile came from the software development lifecycle. It's worth asking yourself, was agile a construct that was created from software, or was software development made agile? Right. So it's worth considering that. Really, when we talk about agility, we are talking about three main things: the ability to change or adapt, the ability to accept or repurpose what we already have, and the ability to react or respond. They're not quite the same. Reaction is usually more reflexive. Response is usually a choice, but that's what we're really talking about with agility. When you take those into account, very often leadership have the ability to adapt to things. And it does depend on what you're doing. Leadership within a very large global corporation, by nature of the fact that it's essentially an oil tanker, you know, instead of a dolphin in the bay, it's going to be very hard to change course on that quite quickly. Which is probably one reason you should never look at a company as just one gigantic entity that can't move. It's better looked at in other ways, where you can talk about collaboration and distributed working and various other things, obviously stuff that we can kind of delve into in a bit. But leadership having the ability to change quickly or repurpose whatever already exists, which in an established company is of more value because it's much quicker to do that than to adapt from scratch. And then to respond appropriately, that's where you get speed. And kind of a last part of that is that agile is not meant to make you fast. Like, the ability to deliver fast is a side effect of being agile, kind of the same way that profit should be a side effect of excellence. But very often people focus on the profit part, or they focus on the speed part rather than everything.
Yeah, I love that, because you know, if you don't think about things holistically, you'll miss the true nature of what you're trying to do. Agility uh, is a way of making something that may be cumbersome more easier to execute. Not so much for speed and for profit, like you say, although those are things that do come because of it. You know, and I love that you say
Absolutely.
it's a byproduct, because that's really what it is. Although some people, as you mentioned, will focus on one of those two and try to bring that down to their benefit. But you know, you was mentioning a collaboration, and I love you use that word, because in a space where humans connect and are trying to reach a goal, collaboration is probably one of the most key areas for you to get there, right? They say if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to get far, you go together, right? You go take somebody, go with somebody, collaborate. So talk a little bit about that piece, 'cause I know you've mentioned that in one of your pieces, but it's interesting to throw it into the agile piece, or the framework of being able to uh, not only remote work as the world knows it now, but just being able to collaborate in a space where you may not be in the same area or same room with someone.
Yeah, it is a problem, or it's a challenge, let's call it, rather than a problem, I think is more accurate. And I've always found that I find a lot of these kind of inspirational sayings quite limited in a way. So I agree, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, except that you can go fast together as well. They're not mutually exclusive. It's just how you do it. And a lot of the idea of agility is to break things down into small chunks and work on them quickly. Now, if we add the idea of complex adaptive systems to that, that's where you're dividing a space where things are unknown. You can't actually see paths. There's no causality, there's no order for which to predict things on. So in that kind of instance, doing things in small batches iteratively with multiple experiments at the same time that are safe to fail teaches you extremely quickly. And actually you can move faster together in many cases than you can alone, especially in a company. But all of that kind of being said and aside, collaboration I find fascinating. It's integral to the very concept of agility. It's integral to the concept of being able to deliver anything in a product model or in an organization or whatever it happens to be. No one person can do everything alone. So collaboration, I think, is fascinating in terms of that, because it's very closely twinned with the communication side. There's no collaboration without communication, in the same way that we actually don't have relationships without communication as well. So collaboration, that's one of the reasons that collaboration was the TEDx talk that I did, right? Where I broke it down into in that instance, I was talking about where collaboration came from, in terms of humans, in terms of evolution. And a lot of collaboration comes from sharing, comes from stories, but it doesn't come from cooperation or competition necessarily. It comes from investment. When you're sharing stories and your stories align, there's this kind of aspect of me becomes we, and we is a much more powerful concept than just me, because me can be quite inhibitive to a grander scale of things. It only takes one person to decide that what everyone is working collectively towards isn't going to meet their personal agenda for money or whatever it happens to be, to throw a spanner in the works, right? That can be quite inhibitive. So collaboration really is different. It's not people aligning, and I say this quite a lot. Alignment is used throughout business, and it's not always a good thing. Technically, the Nazis were aligned, right? That wasn't necessarily a good thing for the world. Collaboration requires everyone involved to be invested in the outcome. And I think that is much more powerful than being aligned. You can be aligned by people and outside forces, but to collaborate, you must be invested in the system, in the ecosystem, in the outcomes, in whatever's there. So kind of moving back around, I guess, to what you were asking in terms of distributed working, how do we ensure people remain invested and collaborate and are engaged remotely? Well, this is a challenge, but there are ways to do it. And in fact, some things that we've traditionally done, like, for example, a really good example from remote AF is all hands planning. You can do more quickly and more collaboratively, to a greater depth, in terms of a living document that moves with you remotely or in a distributed fashion, than you can with gathering people in one room. If you gather everyone in one room, you actually have to deal with a number of complexities to do with humans interacting. Whereas if you have a very clear purpose, working to something remotely and giving everyone a visual voice on a canvas often achieves what you're trying to achieve in a much more effective fashion. So I think that the kind of last part to think about here, which is really important, and this is a typical Chris thing, everyone's used to me saying it, it depends on the context, right? There's a very Chris thing to say. There are some things that absolutely should be or work much better face-to-face, in person. Teaching is one of those things, depending on what you're doing, like mentoring. basic knowledge transfer, not so much, but proper mentoring, the sharing of stories, the sharing. I mean, there are a number of ways you can do this, and you can do it effectively online as well, depending on how you're doing it. But some things that human connection matter. We have a much higher cognitive load looking at stuff on a flat 2D screen. You know, our brains are trying to work out body language. We don't have that depth perception. We don't have that feeling, that proprioceptive element of people nearby, right? So there's a lot that we miss from not being in person, but that can distract from some things when we are in person, and we won't be as effective in person. So it's about finding the correct context for what you're trying to achieve as to whether you should be working on it in a kind of distributed fashion or not, I guess. It's good. It's a typical Chris answer. I never give absolutes because it depends on your context. So
And no, and that's perfect because it truly defines humanity. There is nothing. You could have the same two people in one room. 10 minutes later, put those same two people in and get a different outcome. It's just amazing how our mind is constantly processing life, and any given point will be different for everyone. And so you could have thought about something that emotionally sparked you, and you don't feel the same as you did 10 minutes ago. It's just like that.
absolutely. Absolutely. One of the examples I give with Kinevin is, you know, if you talk about an ordered system like a factory, which is causal, think of a light switch. Even if you've never seen one, if you press it, you can work out what it does really quickly, on or off. To be able to wire one up, you probably need a degree of expertise to do it safely anyway, but it's still causal. You wire it up right and it will turn on and turn off. But in a complex scenario, you might come home from work, if that's still a thing, because many of us are working from home now, and walk into a room and it's dark, and 99 times out of 100, you'll turn the light on because it's dark. And one time out of 100, you'll just sit down in the dark because you feel like it. And that is what complexity is about. It's dispositional. You can guess what might happen, but you can't predict it, right? So it's very different.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about working with people in general. There is never ever a dull day when you're talking about working with
Never a
people.
dull moment.
So, talk about the inner workings of people and collaboration. There's an element of fear in collaborating. Um,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and it's mostly because we just don't know what that outcome will be from that collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about that piece, fear itself, and how it either hinders or could actually sometimes help in collaboration, because it could right side you?
Yeah. Well, this is actually very related to me. So I've mentioned it to many people. I always tend to mention this when I meet people. So I'm pretty autistic. I'm atypically autistic. I have a number of different bits and pieces to that. I have deep levels of empathy. I see patterns and linkages that other people don't see. That can make it very difficult to collaborate. For example, if you look at traditional agile collaboration, learning through play and whatever, I'm very good at that kind of thing. I'm very good at facilitating that kind of thing. I'm very good at seeing the patterns that the other people aren't seeing. All of these things come with their own kryptonite. I'm distinctly uncomfortable being told that I have to participate as somebody who is neurodiverse. And I'm very outgoing. People think that I'm very extroverted, but I've learned to be so. And you'll find that a lot of people, especially in the tech industry, are not necessarily extroverted. So you can actually inhibit the value and the individual unique strengths they can bring to a collaborative venture by trying to force them to work in a certain way. So it's about, and this actually comes back around when we're talking about fear. If you want to reduce that, there are many fears that we have when we're looking to collaborate, especially on things in complexity or chaos, but complexity. And one of those is very fundamental to humanity, which is a fear of the unknown, a fear of uncertainty. That's one of the reasons that contexts are very often misconstrued. People, especially management, for 200 years, people have been convinced that if they can control something enough, which is where micromanagement comes from, and all of this kind of the kind of modernistic warped version of Taylorism, all of these kind of things come from the idea that if you can control enough, then you can force things to become certain, and you can't. That you cannot do that to uncertainty. There is no way to do it, right? You can't take something that is complex by nature and force it to become ordered. It just doesn't work. There are ways to transition things from one domain to another. That's not quite the same thing. So you can manage uncertainty, but you have to accept that you can manage order and certainty in one way, but you have to learn to become comfortable with uncertainty and to manage it in a completely different way. And that's where those safe to fail probes come in that I mentioned. The other kind of fear that is very inhibitive, many things can drive us. Fear of failure means that you're driven to succeed, and that can be helpful and it can be harmful. It depends on the circumstance. But one of the issues that can result is a very closely related fear to psychological safety. So if we take psychological safety as a really key component of being able to collaborate, there are four major stages, I guess, if you want to look at it like that, that are usually acknowledged for psychological safety. And one of them is, or the first one is inclusion, right? So if you're isolated, if you're excluded, it's going to be very difficult for you to contribute to a collaborative venture. The next step is the safety, or the level of safety to be able to learn. You need to be open enough to learn new things. Now, we talk about comfort zones. I've got diagrams I've drawn of comfort zones, which are very different, which are to do, people say always live outside your comfort zone. Yeah, if you want to progress, moving outside your comfort zone is the only way to do it. However, comfort zones exist for a reason, which is psychological safety and the ability to, I'm a scuba diver, right? Stop, breathe, think, respond. You need to recharge. You need to be able to recover before you do stuff again. You can't permanently live in stress. Like that doesn't help. And the more stressed and upset you get, the more likely you are to drop into panic or proper fear, which means you're going to inhibit your ability to learn to do things. So there's an optimal zone where you need just enough stress and just enough fear, just enough of everything to stimulate you to, and it really opens you up and gets you focused. It's like a, adrenaline hit of coffee, if you like. So that stage is the learning stage, and you do need to move outside your comfort zone for that a little bit. Then you have the ability to contribute, right? So once you've moved past the learning, the ability to contribute to something, I mean, that's basically what collaboration is about, right? It's the contribution, it's the investment. And then you've got the last stage, which is kind of the final stage of safety, I guess, if you like, which is the safety to challenge the status quo as well. And that is collaboration as well. If you want innovation in your organization, if you want collaboration to truly thrive, consensus over consensus is just as damaging as single person directives, draconian dictatorships, because in one of them, it's one person's vision forcing you down a way which is quite possibly not right. And in another way, you never get anything done. So how do you find the middle ground? And the middle ground comes from that kind of respectful dissent, right? The ability to respectfully talk things out and together find the right path. So you're aligning yourselves and each other as you go. And that's what the collaboration's about, because you're invested in what's going to happen afterwards. Hopefully, I didn't go too far off track there.
No, perfect, because you're talking about we're talking about leadership, we're talking about the collaboration, we're talking about the ability now to be able to, in a decent and respectful manner, still stand for what you believe is the correct way. You're never going to get the true north. That's why they call it true north, right? There's north. Everybody wants to go north, but it's a true north. It's a calculated, you have to take different pieces together to get there. And unless you're able to, in a like you mentioned, right, there's still hierarchy, there's still positions of authority. You don't want to subserviate that and just come in barreling and just saying, this is my way or the highway, because either way is bad. But you can put it and pose it, present it in a way where it's, man, I didn't think about that. I did not
Well,
think about it.
it ties into a really interesting concept by Lieutenant David Marquet, who you may have heard of. He wrote a fantastic book called Turn the Ship Around. And by the way, books are great, but if you read a book and you think, that's it, I know the next big thing, please don't do that. That's a fad. And you're not actually looking at what the thing is. You're responding to novelty, which can be quite damaging. You can't copy paste stuff from books or from other companies into your context. You can use them as blueprints, but you have to find your own success. Learn from other people's failures. This is survivor bias, but don't try and emulate their successes because they've succeeded where they have because of their context, right? But always worth reading books. This one book, I would say you can take elements from because it's fairly context free in terms of leadership, and it's real life proven in the US Navy, right? So the basis of it was he was, submarine commander, captain, I think, and he had to, take a submarine out, and he was given 180 days to, bring it up to kind of spec, and it was the worst one in the fleet. And also, very, very importantly, it was not the submarine he'd been trained on. So he didn't know any of the systems. So he had to learn to get out of the way of his own people who knew how to do the job and say, we need to get away from tell me what to do, I will tell you what to do, which is how a lot of people are made legitimate, and move to tell me what you intend to do and why, and I'll say yes or no. That frees leadership up for strategic decisions and to coordinate, which is more what they should be doing. And it means that everyone else who's doing the work can actually just get on with doing the work they know how to do. And usually that's a piece of total work, although you do have dependencies between teams and blah, blah, blah. And we get back into the whole agile thing. But the last thing I wanted to add there, because you used the visual of a compass, right, and going for the true north, that segues very nicely into something I talk about in terms of our need to change how we've always done stuff. And it's very simple. The business landscape has radically and measurably changed by orders of magnitude over the last 200 years. And we're still using management techniques from 200 years ago, pretty much. Maps are great. We love maps. Humans love maps. We love our GPS. We love our maps, right? They tell us where we are. But if the landscape has changed, that map is no longer telling you where you are. It's telling you where you were, right? And trying to plot from here to here on a map that is no longer accurate will not likely get you to where you want to go. It's not a very effective way to do it. In that kind of circumstance, finding a direction and modifying that direction as you go based upon new input and feedback is very important. And what David Marquet says is one of the most powerful things a leader can say is, I don't know, or I was wrong. Why don't we try something else? There's a huge pressure on leadership. There's no blame. People can only do what they've been taught to do. And there's huge pressure to always have the answer, to always be right. You're human and you don't have to be like that. You can actually just be as human as the next person and say, why don't we find out together? And the last thing with the compass analogy is, if you've got a bunch of people, would everyone use one compass, especially if they're spread out? Or would you give everyone a compass? Because people, I don't know, 200 meters to your right, it's going to be infinitesimal, but their true north, or their magnetic north rather, is going to be very slightly different to yours. But as you move there together, you're each taking your own journeys. And that's really, really important to understand. Journeys can work in parallel, but you can't force everyone onto the same journey because everyone's journey is different.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that book. This is the second time in so many amount of weeks that I've been referenced that book. I have it right here to my side. But you talk about people and the complexity of just one human being. You talk about leadership, which brings its own little levels of complexity, finding your way to a goal, which is usually what all leaders want. They want to take their people to their next level of greatness so that they can continue to be great and take somebody else along with them. And that's a true definition of leadership. But, when we talking about, and just to bring everybody back to the, remote framework, the environment that we're in, all these different things come to play. You cannot treat leadership in one light. It has to be looked at in a dynamic way where you understand that, hey, yeah, I wasn't right. Yeah, maybe there is another way. I don't know it all. And get kind of similar results to the captain here, and me being a Navy guy, I know him well. So, but it's so critical as humans to understand that we cannot do all things at all time. We need collaboration. We need that level of thinking to allow us to uh, onboard agility, but also employ it in our systems, in our ways of being. Um, uh, Chris, this has just been such a great conversation. I love, and I could stay here listening to you all day. I know you don't have it, but I could do it. So if someone
I could probably
wanted to,
talk all day about it as well. So.
so if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, uh, maybe get you to speak to them and their group, maybe do a workshop or whatever it is that you provide from your business standpoint, how would they do that?
So that, yeah, any of this stuff, all of this stuff, I mean, there's lots more to talk about in terms of decision making and how leaders do it and how we do it, and biases that kind of govern that. All of these things kind of come into the four things that I talked about. So those four things are readily available on so my consultancy website, FindingShores.com. It's actually based on the idea of Tautai, which is the Samoan or the Polynesian Samoan way of moving between tiny islands in a very big ocean. And it's this very holistic understanding of things and not over relying on tools and all of that kind of stuff. So, right. I'm available on FindingShores.com. So you can find me there. I'm on Twitter. What is it? At Christopher Bramley, I think, where I talk about a lot of stuff. You're going to see lots about the fantasy books that I write as well on there. So it's not just business as well. And obviously I'm on LinkedIn, so people can catch me on LinkedIn. But yeah, I mean, I run entire transformations for companies. I do leadership and executive coaching. I look at enterprise kind of level agility. I do drop down to team agility, but when I'm doing that, a lot of what I'm doing is looking at the culture. Let's find where we are with the company. Let's look at your company. Let's find out the context where we really are, not where we think we are or where we think management want us to be or whatever it is. And let's find out what we can start exploring to, let's look at the stories here. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. How can we get more stories that are good and less stories that are bad? How can we start doing that? There are a number of things I can do with that in terms of advice, consultancy, coaching, workshops, full engagement. So yeah, people are welcome to touch base. Just ask me a question. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff.
Outstanding. Well, Chris, I'm going to have that as part of the show notes so folks can get a hold of you. If you're an organization out there and you're wanting to get your true north, let Chris help out. He's ready to do it. And I tell you, this conversation could go for a while. Folks, if you're listening, remote framework is not just your situation, right? Everybody's in a remote kind of situation. It's what leaders bring to that situation where you get the most value and you can make the best of your people, even in a situation where everybody's set apart. Sometimes that works. The key is, leaders, find out what works with your people. Find out. Go to that person and say, hey, what you're comfortable with. What can you do? What are you willing to do? And then as a leader, direct that, orchestrate that, and get to the bottom line, however that is that you're willing to get there. But Chris, thank you so much for sharing your day with me. And any parting words?
Yeah, I'll pop one in there. So when you were talking about the situation for leadership to understand, it does go both ways. And it's worth considering that with the changes in distributed working, we need to have other ways of understanding and having empathy and compassion for everyone, leaders as well as everyone else. So understanding that the paradigm has shifted and having that empathy because of the differences, not despite them, I think is important.
Absolutely true. Great comment there, Chris. Hey, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you want to get a hold of Chris, I'll have that information. But you know how we like to close this show. Success to you.